Are you ready to start your first or the next open source project? You found a niche, you have an idea, you're well motivated, ready to code, and there is only one thing you have to decide now. Under which open source license should you release your work? Trust me, this is a valid and very important question, because this will decide on how others can use your work. The possible choices when deciding on the open source license depend on the fact: is your project a fresh, brand new code, or is it based on someone else's work? When your project will be a fresh code, not based on any other open source work, your job here will be relatively simple. However, if you know and you plan or you will include any other open source code into your project, your choices in terms of choosing the open source license might be highly limited. Today, let's cover both of those cases and decide what's the best open source license for you. With the fresh code that it's not a derivative of any other open source project, you have the possibility to choose whatever license you want. And the choice depends only how you want others to use your work. If you would like to ensure that any future work based on your work will stay open source to the heart of the open source movement, the most probable choice in terms of the open source license will be GPL or the LGPL. Oh, do me a favor, hit the like button and write in the comments what you think about this topic. Thanks, it means a lot and helps to grow the channel. The GNU GPL v3 license ensures that whatever code started its life as the GPL code will remain GPL forever. If anyone in the future will find your work and decide it's worth to work on top of it, then the GPL license will enforce those persons to release their work also as the GPL license and release the modifications of the work to the community. GPL license prohibits closing of the license. You cannot convert the GPL to the closed source. It ensures that the open source will remain the open source. GPL v3 for the projects and perhaps LGPL, the lesser GPL, for the libraries you might want to create. However, the GPL license has the problem because the GPL license makes the potential monetization of your work extremely hard. Not only for others, but also for you. On the other side of the spectrum, you have the MIT license. The MIT license is the extremely liberal license that allows anyone to do basically anything with any code they found anywhere. As long as the MIT license is included, you can do whatever you want with the MIT license code. Absolutely 100% free to use in any possible form. You can even take the MIT code, build the application on top of it, start selling it, and never release the source code. And then finally, somewhere in the middle between the GPL and the MIT, we have the MPL license. The Mozilla public license takes the best of the MIT and the GPL license and creates something like a more reasonable approach to the problem. First of all, the MPL license is not the virus license. It does not affect the whole project. Whatever was released as the MPL license stays the MPL license, and it enforces the release of the source code of the MPL license code. However, it does not infect the whole project and does not automatically convert the whole project to the MPL only if you included one or two MPL licensed libraries. It ensures the code availability to everyone, but on the other hand does not infect the whole project and is not so restrictive in terms of the monetization of your code. Personally, I think it's a nice balance between the GPL and the MIT. But ultimately, in case of starting the brand new fresh open source project, the choice is up to you. Do you want to be super strict, super liberal, or somewhere in between. However, if your project will be using any other open source released code, aka it will create a derivative of other works, your choice of the licenses depends greatly on the licenses of the code you will be using. And this is especially important if you will use any kind of the GPL released code. Either copy paste, use some kind of the library, it doesn't matter. If you use any GPL v3 code, your project also has to be licensed under the GPL v3 license. It's basically not possible to release under any other less restrictive license than the GPL. GNU GPL v3 behaves like a virus. This is why if any GPL licensed code will be part of your project also has to be released as the GPL, and there's no way around it. Period. Luckily, the LGPL, lesser GPL licensed libraries are not infectious. If you use any LGPL library in your code, you still have the option to decide on the license of your work. If you will include any MIT library in your code, you're safe. You still have 100% freedom to choose the license of your work. The only limitation is that what was released as the MIT will have to stay MIT. So you can even use the MIT code in your closed source application, absolutely no problem. If your project will use any MPL license code, your life is relatively simple because the MPL works only on the file scope. That means what was licensed as the MPL has to stay MPL, but the MPL does not infect the other parts of your code. It's the major difference between the GPL and the MPL. Of course, you cannot change the MPL license of the code you used. The parts that were released as the MPL has to stay MPL, and if you decide to release your project under different license than the MPL, you might have to release the source code twice. Once in the way that satisfies the MPL license and once in the way that satisfies the license of your project. Bottom line, if your work will be based on someone else's work, you have to keep the original licenses of the code you used, and in some cases, and especially in the case of the GPL, you are forced to release your code also as the GPL. My personal choice, in most of the cases, not always, is to go with the MPL, because the MPL really is a nice compromise, ensures the openness of the code and the future generations of the code, but does not block you from potentially making something that you can sell. If you would like to know more about the open source, here's the video for you. I'm Paweł Spychalski, thank you very much for watching, and like always, happy coding!